Hello and welcome back to Paranormal NL. This is part two of a two-part episode with Dale Jarvis, author and storyteller and folklorist. Welcome back, Dale.
Thanks for having me.
I'd like you to talk a little bit about your uh, appearance on Grindmind with the
Oh
hag.
yeah. So the boys from Grind Minder, they did this great little mini series, and if you haven't seen it, it's fantastic. They did a really excellent job talking about the old hag. So they had me coming on and talking about the old hag and people's experiences.
Dale,
And
for people who are listening from anywhere in the world, not from Newfoundland and Labrador, because we do have listeners from other countries, can you explain a little bit about what the hag is?
yeah, absolutely. If you're not from Newfoundland, chances are you might not know what the old hag is, but you might have had the experience because it is something that happens in other places. It happens all over the world, and sometimes people refer to it as sleep paralysis. And the way it commonly occurs is you're asleep, and then you wake up, but you feel like you can't move, like someone is maybe sitting on your chest, pressing you down into the bed. You can't move your arms, you can't move your legs. Sometimes you might actually see something in the room with you, and this creature can take a number of different forms. In Newfoundland, we talk about the old hag. So usually it's an old woman, kind of with long, scraggly hair, either standing at the end of your bed or maybe even sitting on your chest, reaching out for you in some way. And so this is an experience that people have. It's kind of a natural human experience. But in Newfoundland, we have so many stories about the old hag, and we have a word to describe her, that we tend to have the old hag more often than other places because it's part of our, I guess, part of our folklore and part of our culture. So this mini series kind of looks at that, looks at the history of the old hag, and provides a couple different examples, I guess, in different ways of that people have experienced the old hag. And people can have very, very different experiences. The general sensation of being unable to move, that paralysis sensation, is fairly common. But then what people see or smell or hear could be very different from person to person.
Have you heard of that story also in Ireland? Does that cross over?
Um, That's a good question. I know it's a thing that occurs in different places. The word that we have in English for a bad dream is nightmare, and I think in English we often think that a nightmare is like a mare, like a horse. Like this is this image that we kind of have in English: the mare, like a female horse, a nightmare being this horse that kind of visits you in your sleep and gives you bad dreams. But the word is actually from a German word that means to press down. Um, and so a nightmare is something that kind of presses down on you in the night. And these stories have been told all over the world for centuries, probably as long as people have been telling stories. People have had experiences with night terrors. So in different places, they get called different things. I know, like in Japan, for example, there's a whole set of stories around a kind of a supernatural figure there that acts in very much the same way that the old hag does in Newfoundland.
Are there any other international stories that you've looked at in your books?
One of the stories that I'm kind of fascinated by locally, there is a set of legends here. Like today, I'm in Conception Bay, and which is a great place for Newfoundland folklore because it was one of the first places that settlers came from England and Ireland, and very old communities and old folklore along Conception Bay and into Trinity Bay. There's an area around Marysvale, Brigus, Bay Roberts part of Conception Bay where there's a local legend about a phantom drummer. And those three communities each have their own kind of special version of the Phantom Drummer legend. But basically, it's about a ghostly drummer who will sometimes play a drum underneath someone's window, indicating that someone is going to pass in that building. Or sometimes people will see the drummer kind of marching along, drumming. And these three communities each claim to be the home of that phantom drummer, but it's actually a very, very old legend, and there are lots of versions of that from other places. And one of the places where I've heard some of those stories about phantom drummers is Scotland. That was a place where certain places had a phantom drummer as well. And in Placentia Bay, there's a story about a spot called Piper's Hole near Swift Current. And it's almost identical, the same legend, except there it's a person kind of playing the pipes. Like it was a military piper that according to legend was killed. So this idea of this kind of ghostly music being played in certain locations is a pretty good example of how those legends came from places like Ireland and Scotland and England and came here and then found a new life in Newfoundland.
Yes, it is interesting to hear how other cultures interpret the same sort of thing.
Yeah,
So,
and fairy stories too. Like we have lots of fairy stories in Newfoundland, and I think people assume that our fairy stories are Irish because I think Ireland's done some good promotion of their fairy legends, but a lot of what we have in Newfoundland in terms of fairy legends is actually probably comes from the kind of West Country, England, Devon, Dorset, Wessex kind of area where a lot of the English settlers came. So our stories here are actually very similar to stories of people being pixie led in that part of England. But then what's interesting is one of the stories here, which sometimes is a bit more of an Irish story, that the fairies will, when people had horses, the fairies would get into the stables at night and they would braid the horses' manes or tie knots in the fairies would tie knots in the horses' hair. And this is a story that has very clear forms of that, variants of that story that come from the old world. But in Newfoundland and in Nova Scotia, the Mi'kmaq have stories about little people as well, and their little people love to play tricks and tie knots in things. So they have a very, very similar set of stories to these stories that were brought over with Europeans when they came. So who knows? Maybe there are these little creatures in the woods that love to tie things in knots on both sides of the Atlantic.
That's an interesting one to talk about. How about any military stories? Have you heard any military ghost stories?
Yeah, there's a kind of a famous one for Military Road in St. John's. So Military Road in St. John's runs kind of at the top of the hill downtown, running, kind of from where the rooms is today, the Provincial Museum and Archive. That was Fort Townsend, and then Military Road kind of runs down along in front of the Basilica, in front of the Colonial Building, in front of Government House, and then where the Newfoundland Hotel was, there was a fort there, Fort William. So there were these two historic forts, and the Military Road connected the two of them. And in one of the last battles between the French and the English, one of the soldiers that was killed in those battles is said to haunt that area along Military Road in front of the Government House where the Lieutenant Governor lives, and it's a figure of a soldier in kind of a 18th century, 17th century military outfit with a high collar kind of hiding its face. And that ghost has been seen over the centuries by a number of people, including a former governor to Newfoundland. So yeah, definitely. And it seems like every community, not really military ghosts, but lots and lots of pirate ghosts. Newfoundland is rich with pirate folklore. I wish there was as much buried treasure in Newfoundland as the legends would suggest, because every community, it seems, has got a pirate legend about some treasure being buried and a headless pirate being left behind to
Have you
guard the
heard
loot.
much about Aquafort? I've heard that's a very heavy pirated area.
Yeah, but all the southern shore, there's so many places along there that have these pirate legends, and they're all very similar in some ways. You know, like the story is that the pirates came ashore and buried the treasure, and then they killed one of their own members of their crew and buried the body on top of the treasure to protect it, and then off they sailed, never returning to collect the treasure, and the ghost is said to haunt this. And so all along the southern shore and Conception Bay, pretty much everywhere in Newfoundland, Corner Brook has a story like that, and there's a face in the mountain, kind of in the Humber River, that looks down on this spot called Shellbird Island, and everyone says, "Oh yes, this face in the mountain was carved by pirates, and there's a great treasure that's hidden there."
Makes you
Probably not
wonder,
true.
Dale, is that why they call it Fortune Bay around that area?
Who knows? Maybe, yeah. All the buried treasure that's just waiting to be discovered. I wish there was some buried treasure out there, but chances are probably not. But lots of great stories, and it's kind of a tradition that goes all the way from Labrador all the way down the kind of Atlantic coast, like down into New England and all the way down the American coastline. There are stories everywhere about pirates and pirate ghosts.
So there's a lot of pirate stuff, but I often think I hear back to the military aspect. There's so much rich, deep history with Newfoundland and the World Wars.
Yeah, yeah, and definitely stories again about soldiers dying at a distance in both the First World War and the Second World War. I've heard stories about, there's a story from Newtown about the family kind of sitting down to dinner, and then one of the sons who was off in the First World War kind of coming in and sitting down, like in his uniform, sitting down at the table with the family, and then vanishing, and then them getting a telegram saying that he had been killed, in France, the same day that they had him kind of walk in and sit down with the family for one last meal. There's a great story that someone told me years ago from around Port aux Basques area about a Newfoundlander who had been one of the merchant marines during the Second World War, and his ship was torpedoed and he was lost at sea. But they would see his ghost kind of appear in the house, and the ghost would walk up the stairs of the house, leaving little puddles of water behind him, get to the top of the stairs where there was a little statue of the Virgin Mary, and he would stop there and almost as if he was saying a prayer, and then he'd turn and walk back down the stairs. And as he walked down the stairs, the puddles of water would evaporate behind him as he walked down, and then he would disappear down at the bottom of the stairs.
Well, today, being that it's Remembrance Day here in Canada and Veterans Day here in the U.S., Paranormal NL decided not to upload any podcasts today. We'll upload them tomorrow. And for our listeners who want to read your books or go on your haunted hike, can you tell us where they can find your books or buy tickets to the haunted hike?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest place is to look for the haunted hike. You can go to hauntedhike.com online. There's a St. John's Haunted Hike page on Facebook. Easy to find, and if you just go to any of your online booksellers and type in my name, Dale Jarvis, you'll find all kinds of Newfoundland books. My books are published by Flanker Press here in Newfoundland, in St. John's. So flankerpress.com. All the books are available there as well, and lots of other books by other great Newfoundland authors as well.
Great. What book are we expecting you to put out soon? Anything in the works?
Yep. So I've got one in the works, all on haunted houses and haunted buildings from all across Newfoundland and Labrador. So hopefully that'll be out 2024.
Oh, we'll definitely be looking forward to that one, Dale. Thank you so much for being on our show today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, to our listeners here on Paranormal NL, you can watch on your smart TV Spotify app, listen on your Spotify app, and look for us on Facebook at Paranormal NL. Stay spooky, everybody.